promised when the heavens that thou wouldest come down, that the mountains might flow down at thy presence as when the melting fire burneth the fire, cause the waters to boil, to make thy name known to thine adversaries, that the nations may tremble at thy presence when thou didst terrible things which we look not for. Thou camest down the mountains, flow down at thy presence. For since the beginning of the world, men have not heard nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee, what he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him. Thou meetest him that rejoiceth and worketh righteousness.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing our study in the book of Isaiah. We're in chapter 34. Actually, we're in verse 12, which is only partially displayed there. But I'm going to read the chapter again because it doesn't take very long and it goes a long way towards recapping what we've studied so far. Come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world, and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury is upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. Their slain also shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and the mountains shall be melted with their blood. And all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falleth off of the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree. For my sword, I actually said sword. Okay. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come upon, why am I reading so badly? Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the fat of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. As we go over this again, I'm thinking, like, yeah, we didn't, the lambs and goats and rams, we didn't talk much about animals in terms of sacrifice, but that's the idea. He's bringing up those animals because the analogy is of a great sacrifice, a great slaughter. It's an analogy, but not a perfect one, obviously, because this is judgment. Animals for slaughter are slaughtered not to judge them, but similarly, the end is the same. And the unicorns shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. And the streams thereof shall be turned to pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night nor day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever. But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch out upon it the line of confusion and the stones of emptiness. He's going to measure out while it's a contradiction of terms. Like, you don't measure out the wilderness, so to speak. I mean, you measure it. Tuhuvabuhu we talked about, but the chaos, like it's funny to think about chaos in terms of being measured and lined and ordered, right? Because we think chaos is chaos. It's like there's no prediction. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen. And I remember watching a program it was this scientist, David Eagleman. He did a series in the brain, and he took all these ping pong balls, and he was trying to explain how somehow in a deterministic universe, how he was trying to reconcile it with free will. And he had all these ping pong balls, and they went in there, and he was saying how every time it would never be the same, and it's sort of impossible to predict because it's so complicated. But that's the thing. It's like if you could take in all those variables, if you could know exactly how you've positioned your ping pong ball and your mousetrap a little differently, meaning it's possible to position things in such a way or to use devices that are a little more precise. But even so, imprecise devices still have all the same forces at work. Why can't you predict them? Well, you can't because you're human. But God certainly is able to know. It says in the scriptures, in the Proverbs, the die is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord. Talking about the casting of a die, the typical, your run-of-the-mill random event, throwing a dice, right? Who knows what's going to turn up? I don't know like how to, I mean, there are ways to game dice, right? But I mean, I'm talking about when you're just letting it roll. Well, God knows. There's no random. Even when he destroys, it's not It's not just like it's just. He stretches it out by line. He measures it out just exactly how chaotic. And that's a heavy thing when you think about it, because it goes right down to the hardest things there are to talk about, such as like the human suffering and so on and so forth. So verse 12, they shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom, but none shall be there. And all her princes shall be nothing. And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. And it shall be an habitation of dragons, and a court for owls. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owl also shall rest it unto them by line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation shall they dwell therein. And as I read that and consider what the next chapter is, it really continues. It's kind of a continuation of the same theme of the wilderness and the solitary place. Are glad for them. For who? For we've been talking about. The beasts and the birds, apparently. But is it more than that? Are the beasts and the birds symbolic of the remnant of God's people, is what I'm thinking. It's not exactly clear, but the same thing, the habitation of dragons gets turned around. So, it's weird because there is this wilderness, but there's also, like later on it talks about this highway going through the wilderness to the Lord's place. Because we are talking about Edom here. And what it's saying is the place where the people of God's curse dwell is going to become, it's not going to be inhabited. I mean, there's not going to be people of God's curse anymore. It's not going to be, the place of their inheritance is inherited by animals. I mean, the God's people inherit the land that God has promised them. But people who have rejected God and that are, reprehensible to God will not have any inheritance. And though that land go through turmoil and destruction, yet it will have inheritors. People always talk about the earth being destroyed, but really, because of environmental reasons, really the danger would be not even, the worst thing people fear is that it could become unfit for human habitation. But honestly, the bigger deal would be other species of animals that are living on the borders of existence. They're barely man that dies off, not because of environmental reasons, because man is a burden on the environment for no doubt. There's very clear, even in the scriptures, it talks about, it talks about the land can't wait to get out from under the burden of the people living on it sometimes. I mean, man and the earth can live together in peace and harmony, of course, but some people, just like, the they treat the earth the same way they treat other people. And it's not that the earth isn't there for our use, you know what I mean? But like to abuse it to the point where, you know, you're ruining it for other people and stuff, you know. You know, and using and exploiting it the way they exploit people. Obviously, it's more serious to exploit people, and so that's a much more problematic thing, because people who exploit people will exploit the planet, of course. You know what I mean? Like, and beyond what is reasonable. You know, I mean, where you're like dumping your waste into rivers that people drink out of and stuff and bathe out of, you know, or, you know, in all kinds of ways in which people behave selfishly to profit for themselves while at the expense of other people and also the environment, because we all got to live in the environment. They should call the nobles thereof, the nobles of that land, of Edom. Remember we were talking about Idumea? Ultimately, though, they symbolize, just as, you know, the Assyrian can symbolize Antichrist, and the king of Babylon definitely symbolizes Antichrist. So, Edom and Idumea represent people of God's curse, because who God rejected, because he said from the womb, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And there's no inheritance for Esau in God's kingdom. His inheritance is given to the animals, because he was a profane person, and he honored not God and did not properly esteem his inheritance. Okay, so you know, they shall call the nobles. I don't know who the they are exactly, but it's meaning. I think it's sort of like a role. Like where are the princes of Edom? I don't know if the call there. Let's look at, because as I was reading this passage, I couldn't help thinking, you know, I might be, you know, wrong chapter, but that's all right. So, okay. So that's the King James. I don't know why I'm sitting there. Let's just look at the good old NIV. We'll even look at the New Living Translation, which is even more of a departure from the literal thing. But I wanted to see what people thought the prophet was thinking when he wrote this thing, because that's what thought for thought translations do. So here they say, her nobles will have nothing there to be called a kingdom. So it's a lot more specific, doesn't it? Or, all her princes will vanish away. Maybe. I see why they dropped out the they. Because I do feel like the they is not really an entity. They shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom. I mean, I do think the force here is basically right. That it's not like they had some call. I mean, here's the thing. Their voice has gone out into all the world. All people hear the call. You know what I mean? People in, what is it? People have the opportunity to hear. There's something, there's enough there that if God wants to give someone faith, they've heard. It will be called the land of nothing in the New Living Translation. They got an interesting take on that. I kind of do like the New American Standard Version, because that is pretty, you know, that seems pretty tight there as far as that seems like the way the prophet writes. Yeah, I mean, like, it's nobles, there is no one there whom they may call king. But they said proclaim. It's a little more specific. But call also means by proclamation. That's sort of the same thought would be in the language. Its officials will be nothing. All right, well, so we're not going to belabor it too much, because I'm not going to try to feed too much meaning into it. You know? I mean, though it's an interesting verse, you know, the end result is the same. though though there be some promise of it. Let's put it this way, that there was some sort of kingdom promise to them, not from God necessarily, but like they had a desire for a kingdom. You know what I mean? There was supposed to be a kingdom, but there won't be. And in a way, I take that symbolically, in a broader sense, not just of Edom, but like, there is a kingdom coming that's of God's, that's of the people of God's curse, right? And I'm speaking of the kingdom of Antichrist, the kingdom of the beast. I mean, it's more than one kingdom. It's really an empire, because once you have kingdoms within one thing, that's an empire. It's a country made up of countries. In that sense, America was always an empire. I mean, from the very beginning. Because it's like it was individual states with the federal government, and it's a federal republic, obviously not an empire, but it had a sort of an empire. I mean, we traversed an entire continent, which is pretty. Countries didn't generally do that, but great empires did. And also it was a byproduct of the British Empire, which was, if you think about the time America rose up, and also what was happening with English-speaking people all over the world, it's just a part of the same trend. Okay. So there is no kingdom, but I think when the two witnesses perish, and the fearfulness surprises them, because they realize, that hidden wisdom suddenly becomes apparent. Oops, shouldn't have done that. Don't regret doing that, but we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have killed God's witnesses. We shouldn't have killed God's son. It's always the sort of thing you realize, triumphant. You understand, when the kingdom of the beast comes, people are going to love it. Just where they love wearing masks, and they love having the government take care of them and make everyone do things and do what they're told. Some people just love to see humanity crushed under a boot, because they hate humanity, they hate people, they don't want people to be able to do. There are just some people who are very misanthropic. I don't know how else to describe it, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because some people delight in it. Some people want to show, and I understand. But when you don't trust and believe in God, for some people that leaves them open to a different kind of hope, a different kind of gospel, one that we can make it all happen here, if we just get the right people in charge. It's socialism essentially, but it is not exactly socialism. But it is that same impulse that creates kings and creates emperors. It's that if we give all the power to someone, they can save us. Someone other than God. It's to some man, not God, but to man. Because God can save us, and he has all the power. I don't have to give it to him, but it's his. But when we give all our human power to one man, or to groups of men, or to some idea, some utopian idea, to make everything wonderful, it doesn't work out. And same thing with Satan's kingdom. Satan's kingdom, however, because he is the closest thing to someone who could be a perfect dictator, who could run everything smoothly, make all the trains run on time, make and keep that economy humming, because he's just so clever. It's not that it's impossible to have one person run everything. It's just it's not humanly possible. So when you get someone inhuman in the picture, so his kingdom is going to seem successful. It says, by peace he will destroy many. He will bring peace and prosperity. He will bring, or at least the appearance of it. I mean, people will believe there's peace and prosperity, which is almost as good as there actually being peace and prosperity. You know what I mean? Because I do think it's almost as good, because I've had peace and prosperity in my soul without having peace and prosperity in the world. It's not something that comes easily. It's something against which all kinds of, contrary things will come. But it is possible. But Satan's kingdom is going to be they're going to love it. And they're going to be sending gifts to one another once it's established that the final challenge is the final challengers of their Lord are destroyed and no more. But then it all comes apart. It's all in a matter of when the two witnesses stand on their feet. It's just hours away. Man, the whole thing's going to be done. Over. Maybe minutes. I don't know how I'm saying it's just like that's just the end. Nothing. I was just curious. Yeah, and it is Idumea, Basra. And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. Shall be habitation of dragons. Dragons, did we look at dragons here? It was serpents, snakes. Sometimes it's a word that means jackal. Of course, in the New Testament they have drakon, which is dragon, which is very specific. There is a leviathan, which is more, the exact meaning of some of the names is not clear. It could be dragons, but I do think here it means, regular wild animal snakes. Because when you see what this totally becomes in chapter 35, in the place, habitation of dragons and grass where each lay shall be grassed with reeds and rushes. But it means a wild place, not a human inhabited place. A place where exotic animals make their dens. Rarely seen things like dragons and owls. Though, again, also serpents and owls. How often do you really see snakes, I know I got snakes all over the place. I've seen one in 20 years. Obviously because I don't go digging around in snaky areas. And in my areas where I dwell, the snakes don't want to come. I found one there. That's where I found one. I stepped out my front door and there was a snake just. So, he gives over their palaces, the places, the buildings and constructions of the kingdom. The big monumental structures, their palaces, their fortresses. Weeds, they become overgrown with weeds, which it doesn't take long, but we've seen it. If you've ever seen like what happened in Chernobyl and subsequent to that, like what it's like now, it's fascinating. People have made studies of it because it is an interesting place, because the wild beasts come back. Though it's toxic and horrible, the animals are all come back and they don't care. The wild beast to his fellow. We looked into satyr, and it was hairy, or and so by extension maybe a satyr, but wild goat of the wild beasts of the desert and the wild beasts of the island. Island means like coast. The coast meaning the close to water and stuff. And there's different kinds of animals that inhabit those different. What do they call them? Habitats. I'm going to bring out my different vocabularies. It's just annoying. Yeah, so in those different habitats, you get different kinds of animals, and they're going to be crossing over all those boundaries. There'll be the coast and the desert and and the animals will just kind of hang out and cross over those different zones. It's just all going to be filled with wild animals. It's going to be a regular jungle safari, the land of Edom. They should call out "Bah!" to each other, or however they call out. And the owls rest and find a place of rest. And the great owl make a nest and lay in hatch. This is where they hatch their young. I see owls occasionally in my area, but I've never seen their nesting sites. I know there are probably people who know how to find that stuff, and but still, they need isolation somewhat, I think, to raise their young. Big birds usually do. And the vultures, everyone with their mate. Where do the vultures breed? Eat them. You know what I mean? And it's interesting because, also, like I said, this gathering of birds also, is indicative of the great slaughter. There's something about the great slaughter that takes place at the end, and the birds, that they come and devour the flesh, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. That the dead bodies that Christ creates are going to be fed to animals. Not fed, but the animals will come and eat them, because nobody's going to bother to bury them. At least not immediately or whatever, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be like this long, lingering issue or anything like that, like afterwards, like there ain't going to be a cleanup. But there's going to be a supper of the great God. And afterwards, it'll turn into a wilderness, and the animals that all, some of the same animals that were, the ravens and the owls and these are all birds that do eat. Owls tend to hunt, of course, but, is that all they ever do? I don't know. I know eagles will eat opportunistically. They don't always just hunt. And vultures, of course. Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read. No one of these shall fail. None shall want her mate. For my mouth it hath commanded, my spirit hath gathered them. So, it talks about animals having, laying, nesting, and hatching. And so it seems, none shall want her mate. Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read, for none of these shall fail, none shall want her mate, for my mouth it hath commanded, and my spirit hath gathered them. One of the things it says that the birds will be gathered by God, just like at Noah's Ark. The animals were brought by God, so also the birds are called of God in the book of Revelation, and they are called to this thing, right? And what I'm just saying that the sort of coming together and the mating process as this culmination of things. The culmination of life is a reproduction of life. Every successful life results in more life. I mean, I think that's pretty simple standard. I mean, I was thinking about the other day, what is, I mean, there isn't much purpose in life without having children. I mean, there is. I mean, you can make your purpose children or the future, or like you don't have to have actual children to make the future, and and children. Meaning, people have, their disciples. Like, like the way in which that, science, like people who work in certain scientific fields or whatever. Like, Einstein has a bigger mark on the world than, I don't know if he had any children. I don't even know. You know what I mean? But the thing is, sometimes it's not just your own children, but you make a mark on other people. Like when it talked about, when Jesus would say, when they say, if I cast out devils by Beelzebub, who do your children cast them out? He wasn't referring to their actual children, but to their disciples. And because that idea of disciples as being children is an old concept. Actual father, your father, because that makes sense. But don't call somebody else your father. But anyways, the idea of the mate, I feel like it means God has these prophecies, right? And they all have their mate. Just like the birds all have their mates, the prophecies all have their mates. They don't fail. Meaning the words God speaks, they don't fall to the ground. They are fulfilled. And because his mouth has commanded and his spirit has brought it to pass. You know what I mean? So he says there will be birds devouring their flesh, and then the birds appear and devour their flesh. That's the mate. Just like, I mean, as far as that's how I see this, just when I first and every time I read it, that's exactly all I can see. That the things that God has spoken in his book will not fail. They will not fail to come to pass. They will come to pass. Then none shall want their mate. They shall not be without their mate. Or his prophets are liars, Really, I mean, how can you lay at the feet of God? Because it's like, it's all at the feet of his prophets. Have they lied? So it says in his book, but God's mouth commanded this. Not the mouth of a prophet, not the mouth of a man, but the mouth of God. And his spirit brings it to pass. His spirit gathers together the resources, makes it happen. So seek ye out of the book of the Lord. It's an injunction for us to look into God's word and read. That's what I'm saying. You have to know what's there. I mean, I forgot that in Isaiah 34, it so closely resembles Revelation 14. Especially that verse, which one was it? Especially verse 6, right? No, wait. The one, well, first of all, chapter 6 of Revelation, verse 4, right? That's a very, very, very clearly referenced in Revelation. And then especially also the, verse 10. Shall not be quenched night or day, the smoke thereof shall go up forever. None shall pass through it forever and ever, right? But then, and a highway shall be there, and a way in it shall be called the way of holiness, in chapter 35. There will be a highway there. I think that goes through Edom into Zion. No one's going to dwell in the land of Edom. And no one will pass through it forever. How is that possible? That at the same time you could have a highway that the unclean shall not pass over, and that no one shall err therein? Because the land of Idumea is no more forever and ever. No one ever passes through Idumea again. It's forgotten. By beasts. From my mouth, I said, Lord, none of these shall fail, none shall want her mate, from my mouth it hath commanded, and his spirit it hath gathered them, and he hath cast the lot for them. Again, that casting the lot refers to like roll the die. Often this is used, well, casting of lots is a little different than rolling the die, perhaps. It depends on, because there's literally, when it says in Proverbs, it says the die is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord. Here it is a lot, which is a little different. It's more like flipping a coin, or a little different than that. Or there's maybe several, I forgot exactly how casting of lots works. It's a little different. Like you could have maybe a bunch of sticks that are wider on one side and mix them up in a thing and then toss them out. And depending on how many are facing a different way or whatever, it becomes like the basically like yes or no, because they would do that. There are even lots that the high priest would use in his breastplate. I think it's called the Urim and the Thummim. There were two stones, and they were to reveal God's will when they had questions. He hath cast the lot for them. So oftentimes inheritances were divided by lot. They would, cast a lot, and then that would randomly determine who gets what. And obviously, because not all things are the same, it can be you can have differing results, right? You can have you got the good place and I got the okay place or whatever. But that's how they did it. They would split it up that way. And so he's saying his word have mates and children, Meaning God says that the king, that Christ shall reign. We do not yet see Christ reign. though we believe he reigns already in heaven. Yet it remains that he must be, it says all things are put under his feet, and yet it remains that all things are not quite under his feet. It doesn't appear in the earth that all it's said by proclamation, and this is right out of Hebrews, it's said by proclamation that all things are under his feet, but we do not yet see all things under his feet. Because God said it, we know it's true, but also we haven't seen it. We only believe it through faith. But it needs to have a fulfillment. He must, all things must be put under his feet. Without that, and so what's saying the way of casting the lots, it doesn't mean random, because like I said, all the disposing thereof is of the Lord. But what it means is God has decided. He said he would stretch out the line of Tuhu and Buhu upon the land, right? But he has divided it to them. Yes, he has stretched upon it lines and measured and cast the lots. But this is decisive. The beasts will have it. This is what I've spoken. This is how it works. When God speaks, it comes to pass. So I think we need to read the next chapter here, and this will help us. All right. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly, and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, and the excellency of our God. Strengthen ye the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and springs of water. In the habitation of dragons where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those. The wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransom of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads, and shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And then comes the historical passage. So we're just about there. So we see these passages, these two chapters are closely connected. It's hard to see even that there should be a chapter division here. And so I do think it's still talking about Idumea. But what it's saying is, the wilderness, the land of God's people. Remember, you understand that Edom is right next door to Israel. It is right next door. So it is, it is a natural region that one might pass through. In fact, you may remember, this is very historical, because Jacob, when he returned from his time of sojourning with his uncle Laban, the father of Rebecca. No, the father. I'm sorry, not Rebecca. I almost said another name. I was like, oh, the father of Jessica. There is none in the Bible. Okay, so the father of Rachel and Leah, Laban, which, Abraham's nephew, actually. The brother, actually, of Rebecca. So it's Jacob's uncle. He returns from his time of sojourning there with his wives and his children, and he's got a lot of flocks and herds because he's been very successful as a herdsman. And so he's coming back, and he has to, in order to return to the land of his inheritance, which he took from his brother, he has to pass through his brother's inheritance land, which is Edom. which is in that region anyways. But he has to pass through his brother's land. And so it was a tight thing. You can feel the tension when you read the passage that Jacob was a little bit worried about his brother. Maybe wanting to kill him or something. Because he hadn't left. He'd kind of run off. And at the time, Esau was very unhappy about being deprived of his birthright. But life goes on, and Esau was a profane person, and he didn't hate his brother, in the end. Because he didn't really want God's kingdom. How could he resent Jacob over his attachment to God and his attachment to the inheritance of Abraham? Esau probably thought that was all a bunch of crud anyways. It was like, the promise of inheritance, promise of this and that, God's promise. What do I need with these promises? I can make my own life by the strength of my own arm. That's the part, I'm going to make the world, we're going to make heaven on earth without God. That's the spirit of Edom. We'll do it our own way. We're big, strong men. We can do it. We can plan the economy. We can plan the world. We can plan everything, and it'll all be great because we planned it to be, because we just said it'd be great. Let's just make it so everyone's rich. You're going to go work at the gas station when you have $1 million in the bank? You're going to go work at the power plant when you have $1 million? Who's going to do anything? And so will there be anything for anyone? So how rich will we be? When there's nothing for anyone, no one produces anything. Whatever. A lot of people don't seem to understand that. You can't just print money. It quickly becomes worthless, and the grinding wheels of reality take time, but they will grind out their bitter flour. So the wilderness and solitary places will be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as a rose. For those whom God has given the inheritance to, the inheritance of Esau is taken from him. To him the hath shall be given, but from him that hath not shall be taken even that which he seems to have. People who have, obtained things in Christ in this world will be receiving even more. But people who do not, make themselves, find reconciliation with God, they'll have no inheritance. And even that thing they seem to have will be taken from them. Your very life, or the salvation you think is available to you. It's like I said, they think they can obtain a kind of a worldly salvation, a long life prolonged by medicine and science. But that is an illusion. So, the wilderness, I may refer to the wilderness then between Israel and Edom. I do think of that also possibly. Now it mentions Lebanon, but it's saying the glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it. The excellency of Carmel and Sharon. Edom was not a particularly fertile or nice area. It was not the fat of the land. It was far from it. And so it's kind of like the land being restored, but also the wilderness. I believe it refers to the Negeb, which is the hot desert region southwest from Jerusalem. Southeast, sorry. Not entirely. My geography of the Holy Land probably should get a boost or something, because I think that would help a little bit with what we understanding symbolically what it means. But we can kind of infer it too. Because basically we have a land that's been depopulated and now given to wilderness, and also perhaps another wilderness nearby rejoicing similarly. Notice when they say wilderness, the desert is implied. The desert and the solitary places. The places that are deserted, but they will be given what? The glory of Lebanon. Now, what is Lebanon? Lebanon is the forest. The forest is abundant with, Lebanon with green, lush, growing things. And that was, seen as full of life. Well, full of life. That's the glory of it. It's alive and vibrant and blossoming. And so it will blossom abundantly. That which was, and this again, that reversal of fortunes. On one hand, you see habitations being given over to nettles and thorns and dragons and beasts and all that, but also the land becoming fertile again, becoming blossoming with flowers and trees, and the excellency of Carmel and Sharon, great pasture lands. Grasses, reeds, rushes. Not desert and devastation, or even piles of corpses, but the land quickly swallows everything up. It rejoices with joy and singing, the land, because of the glory given to it. Because of the rejoicing. And this is just something that you feel like if you ever, I live in the country, and so, I don't mean in a small town. I mean, I live in not a town. I live out in the middle of a lot of farmland, right? But, man, it is just, you can just hear the birds just going nuts singing and like blah, blah, blah. And they're flying all over the place, and it's a very active environment, a lot of life and liveliness, and it sounds like the whole world is happy because they're just singing, and the light is just dawning, and the dew is glistening on the leaves, and a new day has broken, and it's beautiful. And when the land is healthy, there is in green, you can almost feel the life in just the air. I mean, it's just alive. And the sounds and all that, they speak. They speak in their own way. The human mind, we look at peaceful scenes of scenery and beauty and nature, and we feel at peace and see that, and we know it. We know the joy that God's creation and life brings. There's something joyful about just life in the living wilderness. Many people have experienced that because that's how people become almost worshipers of nature. Because what God has made is beautiful. That's how people become worshipers of other humans. Because, men, women, they have their virtues that people see, and they admire them to the degree where it becomes almost like their God. That's not really, very often, the men revere one another as God, but there are certain God-like characteristics which people do ascribe to men sometimes for some god-awful reason. And see, the glory of the Lord, the excellency of our God, in making these things healed again, but also symbolizing that also. There's something more to it. The day of vengeance. God will take vengeance. And he will set the world right. But in so setting the world right, he will bring peace and joy and an abundance of blossoming and blessing, not just for the creatures of the things, but for the inhabitants thereof, the remnant of God. The remnant shall return and come to Zion. As it says, the ransomed of the Lord. God ransoms us. So that's the thing, is like there's a price that has to be paid. There is a blood price. Oh, my back. Yeah, he has delivered them to the slaughter. The nations, Edom, profane. By our hands we shall throw off the chains of God and do as we will. We are men, we are strong. And when men bind together, it's like, who can resist them? Who can resist them in their might? How can we resist them? Only through the Lord. The Lord, except God had shut them up. How should one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight? I can chase 1,000 men. if God will just be with me. And that's what the teaching is. That we don't have to fear men, though we know we're weak, we're feeble. We've been afraid. It says the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and fornicators and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. Such things were some of you. We may have feared, but we more than fear, we trust. You know what I mean? God will come with a vengeance. Say to them of a fearful heart. Because there's fear, weakness. You ever felt like you couldn't do it, handle it? You know what I mean? Here's the thing. A lot of people think they can't. Oh, we can't go through the tribulation. I can't even hardly go through the tribulation of life. How am I going to face the tribulation of the end times? I ran with the footmen, and they wearied me. And I'm tired. How shall I keep up with horses? How will I race with the horses? How shall I race with the horses and chariots of God, with the locust army of Revelation? How am I going to run with them? Can I fly with them? Can I escape them? I'm not strong enough. But God says, no, be strong. Don't be afraid. How can I just be strong? Well, it's just act strong. Don't be of a fearful heart. Because it's inside. Fear is within. Strength is also within, first of all. It comes from, you got to be strong within. Having a strong body. Because it's not talking about literal weak hands. Say, what are your hands weak? Why aren't you doing something about it? Whether your knees feeble, get up. Do something. God says, Jesus, I am come to set the world on fire. What will I do if when I come, I find it already be kindled? He's implying, I like that. I want to find the place already burning. That's right. I'm coming to burn it down. Good job. I see the fires are already lit. What he'll do is say, well done, good and faithful servant. You knew your master's will. Be careful, though, There's a time to build and a time to tear down. There's a time to plant and a time to harvest. There's a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, says in Ecclesiastes. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a day of vengeance when God will come. It will come. He will come and save us. And when he does, yes, the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. The lame shall leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. The place of the wild. I do think this is not specifically Edom, but the place between them. The wilderness between Israel and Edom. The wilderness of Judea. What would be, I don't know if it's in Jordan or in Saudi Arabia. And again, even if people are living in those regions today, the point that's not the point. Edom is gone. Their kingdom is gone. This is not Edom anymore. It's like some Arabs moved in. In fact, even they even get referenced, like Arabs pitching tents in certain areas. So when he wants to say something that's particularly desolate, they say, and even the Arabs won't pitch their tents there. That's how desolate it is. That not in this case, but that was from. I'm referring to Isaiah chapter 13 when it talks about the doom of Babylon. Okay, we're over an hour. We're going to pick up at this chapter we'll finish this up tomorrow and probably go into the historical chapter. So until then, thanks for joining me instead. I look forward to returning again tomorrow. Let's have a little outro music. Here's a little something. How about this?
The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the excellency of our God.